The morning sun cast long shadows across the field hospital as Elena Vasquez adjusted her white cap for the 100th time that week. Her hands, steady despite the chaos around her, moved efficiently from patient to patient. The sound of distant artillery had become as familiar as her own heartbeat, a constant reminder that war had no respect for the boundaries of mercy. Captain James Morrison watched her from across the tent, his leg elevated and wrapped in bloodied bandages. He had been there for 3 days now, recovering from shrapnel wounds that had torn through his calf like angry teeth. What struck him most wasn't the pain that shot through his leg with every movement, but the way this particular nurse seemed to glide through the mayhem with an almost supernatural calm. Elena was different from the other medical staff. While they rushed and stumbled, their faces etched with the strain of endless casualties, she moved with precision. Her dark eyes held something he couldn't quite identify. Not just compassion, but a depth that suggested she had seen more than her fair share of suffering. Her Spanish accent was soft when she spoke to patients, offering comfort in multiple languages depending on who needed her care. "How are we feeling today, Captain?" Elena asked, approaching his cot with a tray of fresh bandages. Her voice carried a warmth that seemed impossible in this place of broken bodies and shattered dreams. James tried to sit up straighter, wincing as pain shot through his leg. "Better, thanks to you. Though I have to ask, where did you learn to handle trauma wounds like that? You're more skilled than some of the field surgeons I've worked with." A shadow passed across Elena's face so quickly that James almost missed it. She began unwrapping his bandages with gentle but firm hands. "You pick things up when you work in places like this long enough." But James had been a soldier for 12 years, and he knew evasion when he heard it. There was something in her touch, something in the way she examined his wound, that spoke of training beyond what any nursing school would provide. Her fingers probed the healing flesh with the confidence of someone who understood exactly how the human body could be broken, and more importantly, how it could be repaired. "You weren't always a nurse, were you?" he asked quietly, studying her face as she worked. Elena's hands paused for just a moment. When she looked up, her eyes met his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "We all have stories, Captain Morrison. Some are better left in the past." The field hospital sat in what had once been a small farming community, now reduced to rubble and memories. The main tent was large enough to hold 50 beds, though they rarely had fewer than 70 patients at any given time. Cots lined the dirt floor in neat rows, separated by thin curtains that provided the illusion of privacy. The smell of antiseptic mixed with something far less pleasant, the metallic scent of blood and the acrid smoke that drifted in from the nearby battlefields. Dr. Mitchell Harrison, the chief medical officer, ran the operation with military precision despite being a civilian. He was a tall man with graying hair and hands that shook slightly when he thought no one was looking. The war had aged him beyond his 53 years, but his dedication to saving lives remained unwavering. Elena had appeared at their door 6 months ago, carrying credentials from a hospital in Barcelona and speaking perfect English despite her accent. Her paperwork was in order, her skills were exceptional, and they needed all the help they could get. In wartime, you didn't question miracles. You accepted them and moved on. What Dr. Harrison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Elena's real name wasn't Elena Vasquez. It was Elena Restrepo, and before she had become a nurse, she had been one of the most effective snipers in the Colombian Special Forces. Her hands, so gentle now as they changed bandages and administered medication, had once held a rifle with deadly precision. The transition from soldier to healer hadn't been planned. Elena had fled Colombia after witnessing atrocities that shattered her faith in the military machine she had served. She had seen too much death, caused too much death, and the weight of it had driven her to seek redemption in the opposite direction. If she had taken lives with her skills, perhaps she could save them instead. Medical school had been a grueling 4 years of hiding her past, while learning to channel her discipline and precision into healing. The same steady hands that had once eliminated targets from impossible distances now sutured wounds and started IVs. The same sharp eyes that had spotted enemies through a scope now watched for signs of infection or internal bleeding. But war has a way of following you, no matter how far you run. James found himself looking forward to Elena's rounds with an anticipation that had nothing to do with his medical needs. There is something magnetic about her presence, a combination of strength and gentleness that drew him in despite his usual caution around romantic entanglements during deployment. "You're from Spain?" he asked one afternoon as she checked his temperature. "Barcelona," she replied, but again he sensed there was more to the story. "What made you come here? I mean, you could work in any hospital back home. Why a field hospital in an active war zone?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes focused on adjusting his foredrip. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "Sometimes the places that need the most help are the places where help is hardest to find." It was an answer that revealed nothing while saying everything. James recognized the response of someone who had learned to deflect personal questions with philosophical truisms. He had used similar tactics himself when civilians asked him why he had chosen a military career. The other patients had begun to notice the way Captain Morrison's eyes followed Nurse Vasquez around the tent. Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez, a young man from Texas with a bandaged shoulder, couldn't help but grin whenever he saw them talking. "Captain's out of bad," he whispered to the soldier in the next cot, a Marine named Davis who was recovering from a concussion. Davis chuckled weakly. "Can't blame him. She's something special, that one. Did you see her yesterday when they brought in that kid with the chest wound? She kept him stable for 2 hours until Dr. Harrison could get to him. Kid would have died without her." It was true. Elena had a gift for triage that went beyond medical training. She seemed to know instinctively which patients needed immediate attention and which could wait. Her prioritization had saved dozens of lives over the past months, earning her the respect and admiration of the entire medical team. But respect and admiration weren't the only thing she had earned. She had also drawn the attention of some less welcome observers. Staff Sergeant Michael Cole was a man who believed that war zones were places where normal rules didn't apply. He was the kind of soldier who saw opportunity in chaos and had little regard for the protection that a Red Cross symbol was supposed to provide. He had been watching Elena for weeks, noting her routines, her habits, her apparent vulnerability. Cole didn't see the deadly precision in her movements or the way her eyes constantly scanned for threats. He saw only a beautiful woman in a vulnerable position, and he began planning accordingly. The first time Cole approached her, Elena was restocking supplies in the storage tent. The sun had set, and most of the medical staff had retreated to their quarters for a few hours of much-needed rest. "Working late again, Nurse Vasquez?" Cole's voice carried a tone that made Elena's skin crawl. She turned slowly, her hands continuing to organize bandages while her mind automatically calculated distances and potential weapons. "The wounded don't keep regular hours, Sergeant." Cole stepped closer, close enough that she could smell tobacco on his breath. "You know, it's dangerous for a woman to be alone out here at night. Maybe you need some protection." "I can take care of myself," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the warning bells going off in her head. "I'm sure you can," Cole said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But everyone needs help sometimes." Elena finished her work and moved toward the tent entrance, but Cole positioned himself to block her path. For a moment, they stood facing each other in the dim light, and Elena felt the familiar cold calm that had once preceded every mission settling over her. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Something in her tone made Cole hesitate. For just a moment, he glimpsed something in her eyes that didn't match his assumptions about helpless nurses. But the moment passed, and his arrogance reasserted itself. "Of course," he said, stepping aside with exaggerated courtesy. "But remember what I said about protection. You never know what might happen out here." As Elena walked back to the main tent, she was acutely aware of Cole's eyes following her. She had hoped that her past would stay buried, that she could continue her work without the violence that seemed to shadow her wherever she went. But some battles choose you, whether you want to fight them or not. Back in the main tent, James was struggling with insomnia brought on by both his pain and his growing concern for Elena. He had noticed Cole's interest in her, had seen the predatory way the man watched her move through the hospital. It worried him more than he cared to admit. When Elena returned from her supply run, James immediately noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes swept the tent before focusing on her patients. Something had happened, something that had put her on edge. "Everything all right?" he asked when she stopped by his cot to check his evening medications. Elena's smile was professional, but didn't quite hide the steel underneath. "Of course, Captain. Just tired." But James had learned to read people in combat situations, and Elena was definitely not just tired. She was alert in the way soldiers got when they sensed danger, her movements controlled and purposeful. It was another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit with her cover story as a simple nurse. That night, Elena lay on her narrow cot in the staff quarters, staring at the canvas ceiling. The sound of snoring from her fellow nurses mixed with the distant rumble of artillery, creating an odd lullaby that she had grown accustomed to. But sleep wouldn't come. She thought about Cole's veiled threat, about the way he had positioned himself to intimidate her. She thought about the other women on the medical staff, most of whom were younger and far less equipped to handle a predator like him. She thought about James Morrison, whose growing interest in her was both flattering and dangerous. The closer people got to her, the more likely they were to discover truths that could destroy everything she had worked to build. Most of all, she thought about the rifle case hidden beneath her cot, wrapped in medical supplies and disguised as equipment. She had told herself it was just insurance, a last resort that she would never need to use. But as Cole's image lingered in her mind, she wondered if her peaceful days were numbered. The morning brought new casualties. A convoy had hit a roadside bomb 20 miles to the east, and the helicopters were already inbound with wounded. Elena pushed thoughts of Cole and complications aside, focusing on the immediate needs of the injured. This was why she was here. This was her purpose now. As the first helicopter touched down, Elena ran toward it with the other medical staff, her training taking over. The sound of rotor blades mixed with shouted medical terms as stretchers were unloaded and priorities were assigned. A young soldier, barely 18, was bleeding from multiple shrapnel wounds. An older officer had burns across 40% of his body. A woman in civilian clothes, a journalist by her press credentials, was unconscious with what looked like a severe head injury. Elena found herself working alongside Dr. Harrison on the burn victim, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she established for access and began fluid resuscitation. The man's eyes were wide with pain and fear, and Elena found herself speaking to him in Spanish, her voice soft and reassuring despite the chaos around them. "You're going to be all right," she told him, switching to English when she realized he didn't understand Spanish. "We're going to take good care of you." James watched from his cot as Elena worked, marveling at her composure under pressure. She moved between patients like a dancer, each action flowing seamlessly into the next. When Dr. Harrison called for assistance with an emergency surgery, Elena was there without being asked. When a patient began coding, she was already reaching for the defibrillator before the monitors even registered the crisis. It was during the surgery, a complex procedure to remove shrapnel from near a patient's heart, that James noticed something that made his breath catch. As Elena handed instruments to Dr. Harrison, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a small tattoo on her wrist. It was a simple design, but James recognized it immediately, the insignia of the Colombian Special Forces. He said nothing, but his mind raced with implications. Elena wasn't just a nurse with unusual skills. She was a trained soldier, possibly special operations. The precision, the calm under pressure, the way she seemed to see everything while revealing nothing about herself. It all made sense now. But it also made him wonder what other secrets she was hiding and why someone with her obvious capabilities was working in a field hospital instead of using her military training in more conventional ways. As the day wore on and the immediate crisis passed, Elena finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She stepped outside the medical tent, looking up at the star-filled sky that seemed impossible in a world so full of violence and pain. The air was cool against her skin, carrying scents of smoke and distant rain. She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't hear the footsteps behind her until they were very close. Every instinct she had developed over years of combat training suddenly screamed danger, and she turned to find Cole approaching her, his expression making his intentions clear. "I told you it was dangerous to be alone at night," he said, his voice low and threatening. Elena backed away slowly, her mind automatically cataloging the distances to potential weapons, escape routes, and areas where she could maneuver if this escalated. But she also knew that any action she took now could expose her true identity and destroy everything she had built here. "Sergeant Cole, I think you should return to your quarters," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. Cole laughed, a sound without humor. "I don't think you understand your situation here, sweetheart. You're a long way from home, and there's nobody around to hear you scream." In that moment, Elena realized that her past was about to collide with her present whether she wanted it to or not. The question was whether she would be able to control the collision or whether it would destroy everything she had worked so hard to create. As Cole stepped closer, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She stopped backing away. The calm that settled over her was familiar, a cold clarity that had once made her one of the most effective operators in her unit. Her posture shifted subtly, her weight distributing onto the balls of her feet, her hands positioning themselves for maximum efficiency. Cole saw the change, but misinterpreted it as fear. He had made the same mistake that many predators make. He had assumed that his intended victim was helpless. He was about to learn otherwise. "That's better," he said, reaching for her. "Now we can." What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Elena's hand shot up, striking Cole's wrist with precisely the right force and angle to cause him to release his grip. She pivoted, using his forward momentum against him, and applied a blood choke that dropped him to the ground before he could cry out. Cole lay unconscious in the dirt, and Elena stood over him, breathing steadily as the familiar cold calm receded. She had stopped herself before doing permanent damage, but the message was clear. She was not the helpless victim he had imagined. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up. James Morrison was limping toward them, having witnessed the entire encounter from the tent entrance. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the unconscious form of Staff Sergeant Cole. Elena's true nature was now exposed, and there would be no going back to the simple story of a Spanish nurse with unusual skills. "Colombian Special Forces," James said quietly. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded slowly. "Former. What's your real name?" "Elena Restrepo." James looked down at Cole, then back at Elena. "What happened in Colombia?" Elena was quiet for so long that James began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried years of pain and regret. "I saw things, did things that made me realize I was fighting the wrong war." "So you became a nurse." "I became someone who saves lives instead of taking them." James understood. He had seen good soldiers break under the weight of necessary, but terrible choices. The fact that Elena had found a way to channel her skills toward healing rather than destruction spoke to a strength of character that impressed him more than any military record could have. "What do we do about him?" James asked, nodding toward Cole. Elena looked down at the unconscious soldier. "He'll wake up in a few minutes with a headache and hopefully some sense. If he's smart, he'll stay away from me and every other woman in this hospital. And if he's not smart," Elena's eyes hardened, "then he'll learn that some people are more dangerous than they appear." As if summoned by their conversation, Cole began to stir. Elena stepped back, allowing James to move between her and the waking soldier. When Cole's eyes opened, the first thing he saw was Captain Morrison's stern face. Sergeant Cole, James said formally, I suggest you return to your quarters immediately and reflect on appropriate behavior toward medical personnel. Cole struggled to sit up, his hand going his throat. His eyes found Elena, and for the first time he saw her clearly, not as a potential victim, but as someone who had just demonstrated capabilities that far exceeded his own. This isn't over, he mumbled, but the threat lacked conviction. Yes, Elena said quietly, it is. Something in her tone, or perhaps the memory of how easily she had dropped him, made Cole reconsider. He got to his feet unsteadily and walked away without another word. James and Elena stood in the darkness, the weight of revelations hanging between them. Everything had changed in the span of a few minutes. Elena's carefully constructed identity was blown, and James now knew that the woman he had been falling for was far more complicated and dangerous than he had imagined. So what happens now? James asked. Elena looked toward the medical tent, where patients lay sleeping and her fellow nurses continued their work, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded outside. Now I continue doing my job, she said, unless you plan to report what you've learned. James considered this. Elena was clearly not who she claimed to be, and military protocol would normally require him to report suspicious personnel to intelligence officers. But he had also just watched her risk her cover to protect herself and potentially other women from a predator. Her medical skills were genuine, her dedication to her patients was real, and her presence had undoubtedly saved lives. Your secret is safe with me, he said finally. Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, relief mixed with gratitude. She had expected exposure to mean the end of her new life, but James was offering her something precious, the chance to continue. Thank you, she said simply. But I want to know the whole story, James continued. If we're going to work together, if there's going to be anything between us, I need to know who you really are. Elena looked into his eyes and saw not judgment, but genuine interest in understanding her journey. It was more than she had hoped for, and less than she feared. It's a long story, she warned. I'm not going anywhere for a while, James said, gesturing toward his injured leg. As they walked back toward the medical tent together, Elena began to tell him about the woman she had been and the woman she was trying to become. Behind them, the stars continued their ancient dance across the sky, indifferent to the human dramas playing out below. Neither of them knew that their conversation was being overheard by someone with different intentions, someone who would ensure that Elena's past would not remain buried much longer. The war was about to come calling on Elena Restrepo, and when it did, she would have to decide once and for all whether she was truly done being a soldier. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Cole, and Elena had begun to believe that perhaps her secret was safe. Staff Sergeant Cole had kept his distance, though she occasionally caught him watching her with a mixture of resentment and wariness. James Morrison's leg had healed enough for him to return to light duty, but he found reasons to visit the medical tent daily, their conversations growing deeper with each passing day. Elena had told him more about her past, carefully edited versions that painted her military service in broad strokes, without delving into the specifics that still haunted her dreams. She spoke of growing up in Bogotá, of joining the military to escape poverty, of discovering she had a gift for marksmanship that both impressed and terrified her superiors. What she didn't tell him about were the missions that had no official records, the targets who were eliminated based on intelligence that later proved faulty, the civilians who died because someone in command had decided that acceptable losses were acceptable. She didn't tell him about Lieutenant Colonel Vargas, her commanding officer who had ordered her to assassinate a journalist who was getting too close to exposing military corruption. She didn't tell him about the night she had put her rifle to Vargas's head instead and told him she was done. Some stories were too heavy to share, even with someone who was beginning to mean more to her than she had planned. You're thinking too hard again, James said one afternoon as they sat outside the medical tent during a rare, quiet moment. The sound of distant helicopters had become as natural as birdsong, and They both looked up automatically to assess whether incoming aircraft carried supplies or casualties. "Supply run," Elena said, noting the steady rhythm of the rotors. "Not medical." James nodded, impressed as always by her ability to distinguish between different types of incoming flights. "You miss it sometimes, don't you? The military life?" Elena considered the question carefully. "I miss the clarity," she said finally. "In the field, you know exactly what's expected of you. The mission parameters are clear, the objectives are defined. Here," she gestured toward the medical tent. "Here, you're fighting death itself. And you can't always win. But you save more lives now than you took then. Doi." Elena's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just playing a different kind of numbers game." Before James could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching made them both look toward the main road. A convoy of military trucks was kicking up dust clouds as it approached the hospital compound, moving faster than supply runs usually traveled. Elena stood, her posture shifting into the alert stance that James had learned to recognize as her combat mode activating. Something about the approaching vehicles had triggered her instincts, and he found himself scanning the surrounding area for potential threats. The lead truck pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, and a figure in dress uniform stepped out. Elena felt her blood turn to ice as she recognized Major Patricia Santos, her former intelligence liaison from Colombia. Santos was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, the kind of officer who collected information the way other people collected stamps. "Nurse Vasquez," Santos called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Or should I say, former Sergeant Restrepo? We need to talk." Every eye in the hospital compound turned toward Elena, including those of Dr. Harrison, who emerged from the medical tent looking confused and concerned. James moved closer to Elena, his hand instinctively moving toward where his sidearm would normally rest, though he was currently unarmed. "Major Santos," Elena said carefully, falling back on military protocol. "I wasn't aware you were operating in this theater." Santos smiled, an expression that held no warmth. "I go where Colombia's interests require me to go. And right now, those interests include having a conversation with you about unfinished business." Elena's mind raced through possibilities. Santos wouldn't have come this far just to arrest a deserter. There were easier ways to handle that. This was about something bigger, something that required Elena's specific skills. "Dr. Harrison," Elena said, turning toward her supervisor. "I apologize, but I need to handle some personal business. I'll be back shortly. Dr. Harrison looked between Elena and the intimidating woman in the Colombian uniform. "Is everything all right, Elena? Do you need—" "Everything's fine," Elena said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Please continue with rounds. I'll catch up." Santos gestured toward one of the trucks. "Shall we discuss this somewhere more private?" Elena nodded, but James stepped forward. "With respect, Major, Nurse Vasquez is under the protection of international medical conventions. If there's a problem," Santos studied James with the calculating gaze of a professional intelligence officer. "And you are?" "Captain James Morrison, United States Army." "Ah, the wounded officer who's been monopolizing Sergeant Restrepo's attention." Santos's smile turned predatory. "How much has she told you about her previous career, Captain?" James felt Elena tense beside him. Whatever was happening here, it went deeper than a simple administrative issue. "Enough," James said carefully. "I doubt that." Santos turned back to Elena. "Sergeant, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice." Elena looked around the compound, noting the positions of Santos's men, calculating odds and distances. Then she looked at James, at Dr. Harrison, at the medical tent full of patients who depended on her. She had worked too hard to build this new life to let it be destroyed by whatever Santos wanted. "The easy way," Elena said. They walked toward the truck together, Santos maintaining the casual confidence of someone holding all the cards. As they climbed into the back of the vehicle, Elena caught James's eye and saw understanding there. He would be watching, waiting, ready to intervene if necessary. The truck's interior had been modified into a mobile command center with communication equipment and map displays. Santos took a seat across from Elena and studied her for a long moment. "You look good," Santos said finally. "Civilian life agrees with you. Though I have to say, going from sniper to nurse is quite a career change." "People change," Elena replied. "Some people do. Others just change their camouflage." Santos opened a file folder and spread several photographs on the small table between them. "Recognize these faces?" Elena looked at the photos without changing expression, though internally her heart rate spiked. The faces were familiar, members of a paramilitary group she had been tracking before her departure from Colombia. Dangerous men who dealt in drugs, weapons, and human trafficking. "They call themselves Los Fantasmas now," Santos continued. "The ghosts. Fitting, since they've been very difficult to track down. Until recently." Elena remained silent, waiting for Santos to reveal why she was really here. 3 months ago, they acquired something that belongs to the Colombian government, Santos said. Something that cannot be allowed to remain in their hands. "What kind of something?" Santos smiled. "The kind that could destabilize the entire region if it falls into the wrong hands. The kind that requires someone with very specific skills to retrieve." Elena began to understand. "You want me to go back? I want you to finish what you started. These men were your targets before you decided to play Florence Nightingale. You know their methods, their locations, their weaknesses. I'm done with that life." "Are you?" Santos leaned forward. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you're just playing pretend. You think changing your name and learning to give injections erases what you are? You're a weapon, Sergeant Restrepo, a very effective weapon. And, right now, your country needs you to remember that." Elena felt the familiar coldness settling over her, the emotional distance that had once made her so effective at killing. "And if I refuse?" Santos gathered the photographs and returned them to the folder. "Then, your new friends here will learn some very interesting things about your past. Things that might make them reconsider employing someone who's wanted for desertion and suspected of murdering a superior officer." The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow. "I never murdered anyone." "No?" "Lieutenant Colonel Vargas was found dead in his quarters the night you disappeared. Single gunshot wound to the head. Very clean, very professional. The kind of shot that someone with your training might make." Elena's mind raced. She had left Vargas alive when she fled Colombia, bruised and furious but breathing. If he was dead, someone else had killed him, possibly to silence him, possibly to frame her. "I didn't kill Vargas." "Can you prove that?" "Because right now, you're the primary suspect in the murder of a Colombian military officer. That's the kind of international incident that could make life very complicated for everyone at this little hospital." Elena understood the threat. Santos wasn't just offering her a mission. She was presenting an ultimatum. Complete the job or watch everything Elena had built here crumble around her. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Santos smiled, recognizing victory. "There's a compound 60 kilometers south of here. Los Fantasmas are using it as a staging area while they prepare to move their acquisition to buyers in Syria. You go in, you neutralize the threat, you recover what they stole." "How many hostiles?" "Approximately 20. But don't worry, you won't be going alone." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Backup. Your new boyfriend, Captain Morrison. His unit has been tasked with providing support for this operation." The revelation hit Elena like cold water. "James doesn't know anything about this." "He will. His commanding officer is receiving orders as we speak. A joint operation between Colombian intelligence and U.S. forces to recover stolen weapons before they reach terrorist buyers. Very straightforward." Elena realized the elegance of Santos's plan. By involving James's unit, Santos ensured that Elena couldn't simply disappear again. She would have to complete the mission or risk exposing James and his men to danger. "And after this mission is complete, after it's complete, we'll discuss your future options. But one thing at a time, Sergeant." Santos opened the truck door, signaling that the conversation was over. You have 2 hours to prepare. The operation begins at sunset. Elena climbed out of the truck, her mind already shifting into mission planning mode despite her reluctance. As she walked back toward the medical tent, she saw James waiting for her, his face creased with concern. "What was that about?" he asked. "It was about my past catching up with me," Elena said. "James, there are things you need to know. Things that are going to put you and your men in danger." Before James could respond, his radio crackled to life. "Captain Morrison, report to command immediately. Priority 1. James and Elena looked at each other, understanding passing between them. Whatever Santos had planned was already in motion. "Go," Elena said, "but be careful who you trust." As James limped toward the command tent, Elena returned to the medical facility to gather her thoughts and prepare for what was coming. She found Dr. Harrison in surgery, working on a young soldier who had stepped on a mine that morning. The familiar routine of the hospital continued around her, staff moving efficiently between patients, the steady beep of monitors providing a technological heartbeat for the wounded. For a moment, Elena allowed herself to imagine what would happen if she simply refused Santos's demands. She could disappear again, find another identity, another life. But Santos would follow through on her threats, and the people here, James, Dr. Harrison, her fellow nurses, would suffer the consequences. She thought about the patients she had saved, the lives she had preserved with her medical skills. Then, she thought about the lives that might be lost if Los Fantasmas succeeded in selling stolen weapons to terrorists. The mathematics of survival were complex, but the conclusion was simple. Sometimes you had to choose between bad options and worse options. Elena made her way to her quarters and knelt beside her cot. Reaching underneath, she pulled out a wrapped bundle that she had hoped never to open again. Inside was her rifle, a custom-built precision instrument that had been her constant companion for 4 years. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, its weight and balance as natural as her own heartbeat. She also retrieved her tactical gear, items she had told herself were just mementos, but had really been insurance against a day like this. The body armor, the communications equipment, the specialized ammunition, all of it perfectly maintained despite her hopes that it would never be needed again. As she prepared her equipment, Elena reflected on the irony of her situation. She had spent 2 years learning to save lives, only to be forced back into the business of taking them. The weapons and medical supplies sitting side by side seemed to represent the fundamental contradiction of her existence. A knock at her door interrupted her preparations. "Come in," she called. James entered, his expression grim. "We need to talk." "I know. You've been briefed on the mission." James sat on the small chair beside her cot, wincing as he favored his injured leg. "They told me we're going after a paramilitary group that's stolen military weapons. They also told me that you've been reassigned to the operation as a local expert." Elena continued checking her equipment as she spoke. "What they told you is true, as far as it goes. But there's more. There's always more." Elena looked up from her rifle. "James, these people, Los Fantasmas, I've hunted them before. They know my face, my methods. This isn't just a recovery mission for me. It's personal." "How personal?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering how much to reveal. Finally, she decided that if James was going to risk his life on this mission, he deserved to know the truth. The man leading Los Fantasmas is called El Sombra, the Shadow. His real name is Carlos Mendez, and he used to be a Colombian army captain before he went rogue. 3 years ago, he was selling weapons to FARC rebels, and I was ordered to eliminate him. But you didn't. I had the shot. Clean, easy, no collateral damage. But at the last second, I saw a little girl in the compound. His daughter. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Elena's voice grew quiet. I couldn't pull the trigger with her watching. So I aborted the mission. James understood. And now he's back. Now he's back. And he's got something that could kill thousands of people if it reaches the wrong buyers. Santos is using me because I'm the only one who knows his patterns, his hiding places, his weaknesses. What did he steal? Elena met his eyes. Chemical weapons. Military-grade nerve agents that were supposed to be destroyed under international treaty. Someone in the Colombian military sold them to him instead. The implications hit James immediately. Chemical weapons in the hands of terrorists could turn any major city into a slaughter zone. The mission had just become exponentially more important and more dangerous. So we stop him, James said simply. We? Elena raised an eyebrow. James, this isn't your fight. Santos is using your unit as leverage to force my cooperation. If you want to walk away, do you want me to walk away? Elena looked into his eyes and saw the same determination that had first attracted her to him. No, but I want you to understand what you're getting into. Mendez isn't just a criminal. He's a soldier. A good one. And he's going to be expecting me. Then, we'll have to be better. Elena smiled despite the gravity of the situation. We'll have to be perfect. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hospital compound, Elena finished her preparations. She had transformed from Nurse Vasquez back into Sergeant Restrepo, her civilian clothes replaced by tactical gear, her gentle healing hands now gripping the rifle that had once been her closest companion. James met her at the helicopter landing zone, along with 8 members of his unit. Elena recognized the type immediately. Professional soldiers who had been briefed only on the essential details, men who would follow orders without asking too many questions. Santos was waiting beside the lead helicopter, her expression satisfied as she watched Elena approach in full combat gear. "Welcome back, Sergeant," Santos said. Elena didn't respond, focusing instead on the mission briefing that Santos provided. The compound was located in a valley surrounded by dense forest, with multiple escape routes and defensive positions. Los Fantasmas would have sentries, early warning systems, and likely booby traps around the perimeter. Intelligence suggests they're planning to move the weapons tomorrow morning, Santos explained. This is our last chance to intercept them before they disappear into the underground network. Elena studied the satellite photographs, her mind automatically calculating approach routes, sniper positions, and extraction points. The facility was well-chosen, defensive terrain with multiple fallback positions. Mendez had learned from his military training. "What's the rules of engagement?" James asked. Santos's expression hardened. "Eliminate all hostiles. Secure the weapons. No survivors to report our involvement." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. This wasn't a capture mission. It was an assassination operation, with the recovery being secondary to silencing potential witnesses. "Understood," James said, though Elena caught the slight hesitation in his voice. As the helicopters lifted off, Elena found herself sitting across from James, both of them lost in their own thoughts as the landscape passed beneath them. The familiar weight of her rifle felt like both a comfort and a betrayal of everything she had worked to become. "Penny for your thoughts," James said over the noise of the rotors. "I was thinking about a little girl," Elena replied. "Carlos Mendez's daughter. She'd be about 9 now, if she's still alive. You're not the same person who couldn't take that shot 3 years ago." Elena looked out at the darkening sky. "No, I'm not. The question is whether that makes me better at this job or worse at being human." James had no answer for that, because he was beginning to understand that in Elena's world, those might be the same thing. As they approached the target zone, Elena felt the familiar calm descending over her. The emotional distance that had once made her so effective and that had ultimately driven her to seek redemption and healing. She was about to find out if redemption was something you could lose as easily as you found it. The war was calling her name, and this time she was answering. The helicopter circled wide around the target zone, its engines muffled by specialized sound-dampening equipment. Elena pressed herself against the window, studying the compound through night vision binoculars. The facility spread across a natural clearing in the dense forest, with 3 main buildings connected by covered walkways. Security lighting created pools of illumination, but also deep shadows that could conceal an approaching team. 2 sentries on the main building roof, Elena reported over the comm system. Another walking patrol circuit around the perimeter, guard positions at the main gate, and what looks like a secondary entrance on the east side. James monitored her observations while studying his own tactical display. Match intel estimates. Standard defensive setup for a temporary facility. But Elena was seeing more than standard defensive positions. She was seeing the specific patterns and preferences of Carlos Mendez, the way he positioned his security to create overlapping fields of fire while maintaining escape routes for his core personnel. She recognized his paranoia in the multiple exit points, his military training in a logical placement of defensive positions. "He's here," she said quietly. "This is definitely his operation." Major Santos's voice crackled over the radio. "Alpha Team, prepare for insertion. Remember, this is a sterilization mission. No one leaves that compound alive." Elena felt James tense beside her. The brutal clarity of Santos's orders left no room for interpretation. This wasn't a military operation with rules of engagement. It was an execution disguised as a rescue mission. "Copy that, Control," James responded, though Elena could hear the conflict in his voice. "Alpha Team ready for insertion." The helicopter settled into a clearing 3 kilometers from the target, its rotors creating a storm of leaves and dust as the team disembarked. Elena was the first one out, her movements fluid and silent as she established a security perimeter. The familiar weight of her rifle felt both comforting and damning as she swept the tree line for threats. James watched her work, noting how completely she had transformed from the gentle nurse he had known into something altogether more dangerous. Her movements were economical and precise, every action serving a tactical purpose. This was Elena in her natural element, and it was both impressive and terrifying. "Team Alpha, sound off," James whispered into his radio. Each member of the team reported in. 8 soldiers plus Elena, moving through the forest like hunting wolves. Elena took point, her knowledge of the terrain and the target making her the logical choice for navigation. Behind her, James commanded the operation while struggling with the growing certainty that they were walking into something much more complex than a simple recovery mission. The forest was alive with night sounds, insects, small animals, the rustle of wind through leaves. Elena filtered out the natural sounds while focusing on anything that might indicate human presence. Every 50 meters, she halted the team for a listening pause, her senses straining for evidence of sentries or patrols beyond the compound's main perimeter. "Movement, 2 o'clock, whispered Sergeant Davis over the radio. "Single individual, approximately 200 meters. Elena shifted her position to get a clear sight line. Through her scope, she could see a man in civilian clothes carrying an AK-47, walking a loose patrol pattern through the trees. He was smoking a cigarette, the cherry providing a perfect aiming point in the darkness. "I have the shot," Elena whispered. Clean elimination, no noise. But as she settled into her shooting position, preparing to take the life of a man she had never met, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced since her military days, doubt. Not tactical doubt about the shot itself, but moral uncertainty about the necessity of killing. "Elena," James's voice was barely audible through the radio. "You have the green light." Elena's finger found the trigger, applying the first pressure while her breathing steadied into the mechanical rhythm that preceded every shot. The man in her scope was young, maybe 25, with a face that reminded her of her brother. He was someone's son, possibly someone's father. But he was also standing guard over chemical weapons that could kill thousands of innocent people. Elena took the shot. The suppressed rifle made a soft cough, and the guard dropped silently to the forest floor. Elena felt the familiar emptiness that followed a confirmed kill. Not satisfaction, not regret, just a hollow acknowledgement that another life had ended by her hand. "Target down," she reported. "Path is clear to advance." The team moved forward, passing within meters of the dead guard. Elena paused to check the body, noting that he wore a wedding ring and carried a photograph of a young woman holding a baby. She pocketed the photo, though she couldn't explain why even to herself. "Elena," James called softly. "You all right?" "I'm fine," she replied, though they both knew that was a lie. Let's keep moving. They reached the compound's outer perimeter 20 minutes later. Elena studied the security layout through her scope, noting changes from the intelligence photos. Mendez had added additional guard positions and what looked like improvised explosive devices along the most obvious approach routes. "He's been busy," Elena murmured. "Additional defensive positions since the satellite imagery. IEDs along the main approaches." James studied the compound through his own binoculars. "How do we get in?" Elena pointed to a section of the perimeter where the lighting was less complete. "There, between the two guard towers. It looks exposed, but that's because he's counting on people avoiding the obvious trap." "What trap?" Elena smiled grimly. "The obvious approaches are mined, but that section has a clear field of fire from the main building. He's expecting people to avoid it, so he hasn't bothered with explosives there. And we just walk across a killing field. We neutralize the Overwatch first, then we have a clear approach." Elena was already identifying sniper positions and calculating angles of fire. "Give me 15 minutes to get into position. When you see the window guards go down, that's your signal to move." James nodded, though every instinct told him that splitting up was a bad idea. "What about exfiltration?" "Same route." "But James—" Elena met his eyes in the darkness. "If something goes wrong, don't try to extract me. Complete the mission and get your people out." "Elena, promise me. Whatever happens to me, those weapons can't reach their buyers." James wanted to argue, but he could see in her expression that this wasn't negotiable. "I promise." Elena melted into the forest like smoke, her movements so quiet that James lost sight of her within seconds despite knowing which direction she had taken. She moved in a wide circle around the compound, using terrain features to mask her approach while identifying the best shooting positions. The main building had 2 guards visible in upper-story windows, both armed with rifles and equipped with night vision equipment. Elena studied their patrol patterns, timing their movements, and identifying the brief windows when both guards would be looking away from her proposed infiltration route. She settled into her shooting position 300 meters from the building, using a fallen log as both concealment and a stable firing platform. The shots would need to be taken in rapid succession, less than 3 seconds between targets to prevent the second guard from reacting to the first death. "Alpha Team, this is Overwatch," Elena whispered into her radio. "In position, ready to provide suppressing fire on your signal." "Copy, Overwatch." Team Alpha moving to assault position. Elena watched through her scope as James led his team to the edge of the cleared ground around the compound. They moved with professional competence, but she could see the tension in their movements. They were good soldiers, but this kind of close-quarters combat wasn't their specialty. Overwatch, Alpha Team in position, requesting suppression of Overwatch targets. Elena took a deep breath and began her firing sequence. The first shot took the guard in the left window, the heavy bullet punching through the glass and dropping him immediately. Before his body hit the floor, Elena had shifted to the second target and squeezed the trigger again. 2 shots, 2 kills, elapsed time less than 4 seconds. Overwatch targets neutralized. You have a clear approach. James led his team across the open ground at a run, covering the distance to the main building in less than 30 seconds. Elena maintained Overwatch, sweeping for additional threats while tracking their progress through her scope. The team reached the building without incident, stacking up beside the main entrance while James prepared breaching charges. Elena shifted her position to cover the secondary exits, knowing that Mendez would have planned multiple escape routes. Overwatch, Alpha Team ready for entry. Maintain cover on exits. Copy, Alpha Team. I have eyes on the back door and east window. The breaching charge detonated with a sharp crack, and James's team flowed through the entrance like water, their movements coordinated by countless hours of training. Elena watched through her scope as muzzle flashes strobed through the building's windows, the sound of automatic weapons fire echoing across the compound. Then she saw movement at the back door, 3 figures in tactical gear moving quickly toward the tree line. One of them was larger than the others, with the confident bearing of a military leader. Mendez. Elena shifted her aim to intercept them, but they were using smoke grenades to mask their movement. She could catch glimpses of them through the artificial fog, but not enough for a clean shot. Alpha Team, be advised. 3 personnel exiting through back door, heading for the tree line. I cannot get a clear shot through smoke. Copy, Overwatch. We're dealing with multiple hostiles inside. Cannot pursue at this time. Elena made a decision that would haunt her for years. Abandoning her Overwatch position, she moved to intercept the fleeing targets. This wasn't part of the plan, and it meant leaving James's team without sniper support, but Mendez could not be allowed to escape with knowledge of their operation. She moved through the forest parallel to the fleeing men's route, using her knowledge of Mendez's thinking to anticipate where they would go. He would want to reach a vehicle cache or a secondary safe house, somewhere he could regroup and plan his next move. Elena reached the forest road ahead of the fleeing men and settled into an ambush position. Through her scope, she could see headlights approaching, a pickup truck driven by someone not wearing tactical gear, probably a local hired for extraction. When Mendez and his 2 companions reached the road, Elena had a clear shot at all 3 of them. The smart tactical choice would be to eliminate all threats immediately. But as Mendez stepped into her crosshairs, Elena found herself hesitating again. This wasn't the heat of battle or a split-second decision. This was a deliberate execution, and Elena discovered that 2 years of saving lives had changed her more than she realized. The man in her scope was a threat to innocent people, but he was also someone's father, someone's son. The hesitation cost her the initiative. Mendez suddenly looked directly at her position, his military instincts warning him of danger. Their eyes met through the rifle scope, and Elena saw recognition flash across his face. He dove for cover just as Elena squeezed the trigger, the bullet shattering the truck's windshield instead of finding its intended target. Elena Restrepo, Mendez called out in Spanish. The ghost returns to haunt me. Elena shifted position, knowing that Mendez would be trying to flank her. Carlos, this doesn't have to end in more death. Tell me where the weapons are, and I'll let you walk away. Mendez's laugh was bitter. You had your chance to kill me 3 years ago. Your mercy then has led to this moment. Where is your daughter, Carlos? Is she safe? The question hit its target. Elena heard Mendez's intake of breath, saw him hesitate in his movement toward her position. She's safe, he said finally. Far from this life. Because of what you didn't do that night. Elena processed this information while keeping her rifle trained on Mendez's last known position. Then, don't make her an orphan tonight. The weapons, Carlos. Where are they? Gone, Mendez replied. Moved yesterday. You're too late. Elena felt her heart sink. If the weapons had already been transferred, their entire operation had been for nothing. Worse, it meant that chemical weapons were now in the wind, potentially headed for terrorist buyers who would have no hesitation about using them on civilian populations. You're lying, Elena called out, though she feared he wasn't. Am I? Check the warehouse in the main building. See for yourself. Elena heard the sound of an approaching vehicle, backup for Mendez, or perhaps his extraction arriving. She had seconds to decide whether to take the shot when she had it, or try to verify his claims about the weapons. The decision was made for her when gunfire erupted from multiple positions around her. Mendez had more men than intelligence had suggested, and they had used his conversation with Elena to surround her position. Elena rolled away from her shooting position just as bullets began chewing up the earth where she had been lying. Her radio crackled with James's voice. Overwatch, Alpha Team has secured the building. Multiple Kia, but we found the storage facility. It's empty. Elena's heart sank even as she returned fire at the muzzle flashes surrounding her. Mendez had been telling the truth. The weapons were gone. Alpha Team, Overwatch is under fire approximately 400 meters northeast of your position. Multiple hostiles. Copy, Overwatch. Moving to assist. Elena continued her fighting withdrawal, using the terrain to break contact with Mendez's men. She could hear vehicles moving on the road, the sound of reinforcements arriving for both sides. The operation was becoming a running firefight, exactly the kind of situation that military planners tried to avoid. She reached a small clearing and took cover behind a fallen tree, using her radio to coordinate with James's approaching team. Alpha Team, I'm in a clearing with a large fallen tree on the north side. Approximately 6 hostiles between my position and yours. Copy, Overwatch. We see your muzzle flashes. Preparing to flank hostile positions. Elena could hear James's team maneuvering through the forest, their movement much louder than her own, but effective for their purpose. The hostiles found themselves caught between Elena's precision fire and James's team's superior numbers. The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours to Elena. When the last hostile was down, she found herself face to face with James in the forest clearing, both of them breathing heavily from exertion and adrenaline. Status report, James said. Mendez escaped, and he was telling the truth. The weapons are gone. Moved yesterday, according to him. James swore quietly. Then, we've failed. Maybe not. If he moved them yesterday, they can't have gone far. And Mendez knows I'll keep coming for them as long as they exist. Elena was already planning her next move, thinking about Mendez's patterns and preferences. He would want to keep the weapons close enough for control, but far enough for safety. There were only so many facilities in the region capable of storing chemical weapons safely. Elena, James said quietly, we need to talk about what happens next. Elena looked at him and saw understanding in his eyes. The mission was blown, Mendez was in the wind, and Elena was once again a fugitive from both Colombian intelligence and international law. I know, she said. This is where we say goodbye. James shook his head. No, this is where we figure out how to finish what we started. Elena felt something she had almost forgotten, hope. Not just for completing the mission, but for the possibility that she didn't have to face the future alone. But first, they had to survive the present. Elena could hear helicopters approaching, and she wasn't sure if they belonged to their extraction team or to Mendez's reinforcements. Alpha Team, this is Control. Santos's voice came over the radio. Status report. James looked at Elena, and she could see him making a decision that would define both their futures. Control, Alpha Team has completed primary objective. Target facility secured, but intelligence suggests secondary sites require investigation. Elena raised an eyebrow. James was buying them time, giving them a chance to pursue the weapons without admitting that they had failed to secure them. Copy, Alpha Team. Extraction helicopter inbound. Prepare for immediate exfiltration. Elena shouldered her rifle and looked at James. You know, this means you're choosing me over your orders. James smiled grimly. I'm choosing to stop chemical weapons from reaching terrorists. Everything else is secondary. As the helicopter settled into the clearing, Elena realized that everything had changed again. She was no longer a nurse pretending to be a former soldier, or a former soldier pretending to be a nurse. She was something new, a person who had found a way to use all of her skills in service of something larger than herself. The weapons were still out there, Mendez was still alive, and Major Santos would eventually realize that they had been less than completely honest in their mission report. But for the first time in years, Elena wasn't facing the future alone. As they climbed into the helicopter together, Elena allowed herself to believe that perhaps redemption wasn't something you achieved once and kept forever. Perhaps it was something you had to earn again and again, one choice at a time. The war wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But this time, Elena wasn't running from her past. She was using it to build a better future. Elena stared at the map spread across the small table in their temporary safe house, her mind processing patterns and possibilities while the morning sun filtered through dusty windows. They had been hiding in the abandoned warehouse for 3 days, ever since Major Santos had discovered that her mission reports contained creative interpretations of the truth. James sat across from her, studying intelligence reports they had gathered through unofficial channels. His leg was healing well, but Elena could see the strain in his eyes, the weight of choosing loyalty to her over loyalty to his chain of command. 3 possible locations, Elena said, pointing to marked positions on the map. The old mining facility here, the abandoned chemical plant to the east, and this industrial complex near the border. Which one fits Mendez's profile best? Elena traced her finger around the map, visualizing each location from a tactical perspective. The mining facility has good security, but limited escape routes. The chemical plant has the right infrastructure, but it's too close to civilian populations. Mendez wouldn't risk that kind of exposure. That leaves the industrial complex. Elena looked up from a map. But, James, we need to discuss what happens after we find the weapons. James had been dreading this conversation. They both knew that their current situation was unsustainable. Santos had declared Elena a fugitive, and James's continued absence from his unit would soon trigger a manhunt for both of them. We could contact your intelligence services, Elena suggested. Turn over the weapons location in exchange for protection. You know, it's not that simple. Santos wants you dead or disappeared, and she has enough influence to make that happen regardless of what deals we try to make. Elena nodded, having reached the same conclusion. Then, we finish this ourselves. Elena, the complex will be heavily defended. Mendez knows we're coming, and he'll be prepared this time. This isn't a mission we can complete with just the 2 of us. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street where vendors were setting up their morning market stalls. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that somewhere nearby sat weapons capable of destroying everything they held dear. There's someone who might help us, Elena said finally. Someone who has his own reasons for wanting Mendez stopped. James raised an eyebrow. Who? Diego Santos. Major Santos's brother. He used to be Mendez's second-in-command before Mendez went rogue. And now? Now he's serving 15 years in a Colombian military prison for refusing to follow illegal orders. But he knows Mendez better than anyone, and he has access to resources that could help us. James considered this. You're talking about breaking someone out of military prison. I'm talking about recruiting someone who has the skills and motivation to help us stop a terrorist attack. The plan that Elena was suggesting was insane, desperate, and probably suicidal. It was also the only option they had that didn't involve walking away while chemical weapons made their way to buyers who would use them on innocent people. How do we even contact him? James asked. Elena smiled grimly. Very carefully. Elena's plan began with a phone call to Dr. Harrison at the field hospital. She used a payphone 3 kilometers from their safe house, speaking in Spanish and using a code phrase that would identify her without compromising the doctor. Dr. Harrison, this is Elena. I need you to know that I'm safe, but I can't return to the hospital right now. Elena, thank God. Major Santos has been asking questions about you. She seems to think you deserted from some kind of mission. Elena closed her eyes. Santos was already building her case against Elena, preparing to paint her as a traitor who had abandoned her duty. Doctor, I need a favor. It's dangerous, and I understand if you can't help. There was a long pause. What do you need? I need you to send a medical consultation request to the military prison at Tolemeda. A request for an examination of prisoner Diego Santos, cell block 7. Make it urgent. Possible appendicitis that requires immediate evaluation. Dr. Harrison was quiet for so long that Elena began to think the connection had been lost. Elena, what are you involved in? I'm trying to stop something terrible from happening. I can't tell you more than that, but innocent people will die if I fail. Another pause. The consultation request will be sent within the hour. Elena felt a wave of gratitude and guilt. Dr. Harrison was risking his career and possibly his freedom to help her, based on nothing more than trust built during months of working together. Thank you, Elena said simply. Elena, be careful. Whatever you're doing, be careful. The line went dead, and Elena walked back toward their safe house, her mind already working through the next phase of their plan. James was waiting with additional intelligence gathered from his own contacts. Elena was impressed by the network he had built during his military career. Soldiers, contractors, and intelligence operatives who were willing to share information based on personal loyalty rather than official channels. Diego Santos will be transferred to the military hospital tomorrow morning for medical evaluation, Elena reported. We'll have a window of opportunity during the transport. What kind of window? 30 minutes, maybe less. The convoy route is predictable, but the security will be tight. James studied the route on their map. How do you want to play it? Elena pointed to a section of road that passed through a construction zone. Here, traffic will be slowed, sight lines will be restricted, and there's multiple escape routes through the side streets. And then what? Assuming we can extract Diego without getting killed, what makes you think he'll help us? Elena looked at James with an expression he was learning to recognize, the cold calculation of someone who understood human nature at its most basic level. Because Diego Santos has spent 2 years in prison thinking about how much he hates Carlos Mendez for destroying his life. And because I'm going to offer him something he wants more than revenge, which is a chance to prevent his sister from making the same mistakes he did. The next morning, Elena and James positioned themselves along the convoy route, watching for the prison transport. Elena wore the uniform of a Colombian medical technician, complete with forged credentials that would stand up to casual inspection. James was dressed as a construction worker, his role to provide cover and escape assistance. The convoy appeared exactly on schedule, 2 escort vehicles and an armored transport carrying Diego Santos. Elena waited until the vehicles slowed for the construction zone, then stepped into the road with her medical bag and official-looking clipboard. She approached the lead vehicle with the confident stride of someone who belonged there, using authority and assumption to overcome questions. The soldier in the passenger seat rolled down his window. Medical emergency, Elena announced in Spanish. We have reports of possible contamination in the prison water supply. I need to examine the prisoner immediately. The soldier looked confused. We weren't informed of any medical emergency. Elena pulled out her forged authorization forms. The contamination was discovered this morning. Possible cholera outbreak. The prisoner needs immediate blood work and evaluation. The mention of cholera got the soldier's attention. Nobody wanted to risk a disease outbreak, especially one that could spread to the guards and medical personnel. Let me check with command, the soldier said, reaching for his radio. Elena had anticipated this. Sergeant, every minute we delay increases the risk of exposure. The prisoner is already showing symptoms according to the prison medical staff. While Elena engaged the lead vehicle, James had positioned himself near the transport truck. He had disabled the vehicle's radio antenna while the guards were distracted by Elena's performance, ensuring they couldn't easily call for backup. All right, the lead soldier said finally. But this has to be fast. Elena nodded and walked toward the transport truck. The guards opened the back door, revealing Diego Santos shackled to a bench inside the vehicle. He was a small man with graying hair and intelligent eyes that immediately assessed Elena as a threat. Prisoner Santos, Elena said in Spanish, I need to examine you for possible illness. Diego looked at her carefully, noting details that the guards missed. Elena's hands moved with the precision of someone with military training, and her Spanish carried an accent that wasn't Colombian. What kind of illness? Diego asked. Elena leaned closer, ostensibly to check his pulse. The kind that requires immediate treatment away from here, she whispered. Diego's eyes widened as he understood what was happening. He had spent 2 years in prison, and he recognized a rescue attempt when he saw one. I do feel quite ill, Diego said loudly. Nausea, dizziness, possible fever. Elena nodded and turned to the guards. He needs immediate transport to the hospital. I'll accompany him to monitor his condition. What happened next took less than 30 seconds. Elena produced a syringe that she claimed contained medication, but which actually contained a fast-acting sedative. As she pretended to inject Diego, James appeared at the back of the truck wearing a military uniform he had acquired through channels Elena preferred not to know about. Medical emergency, James announced in accented Spanish. "We're taking the prisoner to the hospital immediately." The guard were caught off balance by the sudden change in procedure. While they were processing the situation, Elena had already unlocked Diego's shackles with keys she had lifted from the lead guard during her medical examination. "Wait," one of the guards said, finally, realizing that something was wrong. "This doesn't." Diego collapsed, apparently overcome by his sudden illness. Elena and James immediately moved to lift him, creating a medical emergency that demanded immediate action. In the confusion, it took the guards several seconds to realize that the unconscious prisoner and his medical team had disappeared into the construction site's maze of equipment and temporary barriers. By the time the guards organized a search, Elena, James, and Diego were 3 blocks away, moving through back alleys toward a stolen motorcycle that would carry them to their next safe house. Diego Santos regained consciousness 20 minutes later in the basement of an abandoned building. He found himself face to face with Elena and James, both armed and watching him carefully. "Who are you?" Diego asked in English, his voice steady despite his circumstances. "Someone who needs your help to stop your former commander from starting a war," Elena replied. Diego laughed bitterly. Carlos Mendez started a war the day he decided that money was more important than honor. "What makes you think I can stop him now?" Elena leaned forward. "Because you know him. You know his patterns, his weaknesses, his fears. And because you know that if those chemical weapons reach their intended buyers, thousands of innocent people will die. And what do I get in return for helping you?" Elena met his eyes. "A chance to save your sister from making the same mistakes you made." Diego's expression hardened. "What do you know about Patricia?" "I know she's using this weapons recovery as an opportunity to eliminate witnesses and cover up the corruption that allowed the weapons to be stolen in the first place. I know she's planning to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. And I know that when this is over, she'll be just as dirty as the people she's supposedly fighting against." Diego was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "You think Patricia is involved in the original theft?" "I think your sister has been playing multiple sides for years, and she's using this crisis to eliminate loose ends. The question is whether you want to help her cover up her crimes or help me expose the truth." Elena watched Diego consider his options. She was gambling everything on her read of his character. That despite his imprisonment, despite his bitterness, he was still fundamentally a good man who wanted to do the right thing. "What exactly are you proposing?" Diego asked finally. Elena spread a map on the small table. "We hit the industrial complex where Mendez is storing the weapons. We secure the chemical agents and turn them over to legitimate authorities. Not your sister, not Colombian intelligence, but to international agencies that can ensure they're safely destroyed." "That's suicide." "Mendez will have the place locked down tight after your last attempt." James spoke for the first time. "That's where you come in. You know his security protocols, his backup plans. You can get us inside." Diego studied the two of them, weighing their chances of success against the alternatives. "If we do this, if we somehow manage to secure the weapons, what makes you think we'll survive long enough to turn them over to anyone?" Elena smiled grimly. "Because I'm not planning to just secure the weapons. I'm planning to end Carlos Mendez permanently." The next 24 hours were spent in intensive planning. Diego proved to be a valuable source of intelligence about Mendez's operations, providing insights that no amount of surveillance could have revealed. "Carlos is paranoid," Diego explained, sketching the layout of the industrial complex. "He'll have 3 rings of security, perimeter guards, building security, and a personal protection team around the weapons storage area." "What about escape routes?" James asked. "Multiple. Carlos never puts himself in a position